My name is Anna Reuss. I'm from the German School of Journalism. I'm here at the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum, and I'm talking to David Kramer, who is the president of an organization called Freedom House. Your organization conducts research on democracy. How do you estimate the value of political freedom in a world that is facing so many crises and wars?
Our annual report called Freedom in the World, which measures political rights and civil liberties in every country around the world, has registered a decline for the past 8 years. We'll be coming out with a new report in January, and while I haven't seen the results because the year is not over yet, I would not be surprised if we see a 9th year of decline. This is not precipitous decline, not huge declines, but a steady decline where we see more countries registering declines on political rights and civil liberties, on overall freedom, than we have seen gains. The two particularly challenging places are the Middle East and North Africa, particularly the situation in Syria, but not just in Syria. Egypt is going in the wrong direction in our view. And we also see this in the case of Eurasia, Russia and Eurasia, which has now become one of the worst regions for political rights and civil liberties.
Okay, where does Freedom House collect the information on democracy from in the different countries? How does your network work?
We've been doing Freedom in the World report since 1972. We've been doing the Freedom of the Press report since 1980. We rely on a network of analysts and contributors from around the world, including from the countries which we assess. We then put that through a very rigorous vetting process where we assess the narratives and the rankings and the scores that our analysts assign to all the countries. We have advisors and experts who review this, who make sure that we are coming up with the best possible assessments for these countries. And we don't pretend that it's perfect, but we've been doing it for such a long period of time that I think we've developed a very strong track record that people can use the basis starting from 1972 until the present day.
I'm now coming up with a very specific question. What do you think about the so-called elections in the eastern Ukraine?
I don't think anyone recognizes them. Even the President Putin's foreign policy advisor, Yuri Ushakov, said that he used the word respect, not recognize. I'm not sure, frankly, what the difference is between the two. But certainly no democracy, no country in Europe, certainly not the United States, recognize these so-called elections in Donetsk and Luhansk. Moscow should have used its influence to make sure that these elections didn't take place. They don't contribute to the peace process, and they're further signs of Putin's efforts to try to destabilize Ukraine, particularly coming after the October 26 parliamentary elections in Ukraine, which everyone did recognize, and which produced a very positive pro-European result. Putin obviously didn't like that result and wanted to resume his efforts to destabilize Ukraine, make trouble for it, make it as ugly and unappealing as possible.
How do you think should Western countries react on the Ukraine conflict, in your opinion? Are economic sanctions on Russia enough?
I think the sanctions have been the right policy to take. I think they've been too slow and too reactive, but I think they're the right policy. I think we may see the Republican Senate and House pass further measures in the U.S. calling for sanctions against Gazprom, for example, which so far has not been sanctioned. But I think what's missing is providing military support to Ukraine, helping Ukraine defend itself, and that has to be accompanied with the sanctions. The sanctions alone are certainly having an impact on the Russian economy, but they're not changing Putin's calculus and behavior toward Ukraine. I think if we were to provide military assistance to Ukraine, where Ukraine could defend itself against this Russian aggression and attack, that would change Putin's thinking.
One last question. What do you think are the most important problems of the Ukraine so far?
Ukraine's biggest problem has been corruption, and this has been true not just with the Yanukovych presidency, but with the Yushchenko presidency, for every presidency since Ukraine regained its independence. And so Ukraine needs to deal with the corruption problem. Corruption made it vulnerable and dependent on Russia, and it needs to become a much more efficient country in use of energy, because it's poor use of energy, where it uses, I think it's 6 times as much energy as Germany, even though Germany has twice the population and is a much more productive society. Suggests that Ukraine just fritters away the energy that it has, increases its dependency on Russia, it could become much more efficient. We need to see the economic reforms, but then we need to see Russian forces get out of Ukraine, including Crimea. We can't forget Crimea and just write it off as a hopeless cause. We never recognized the absorption of the Baltic states into the Soviet Union in the 1940s, and for decades after, the Baltic states are now members of NATO and the EU, so one should never assume that a cause is hopeless. We need to remember that the sanctions started because of the Russian annexation of Crimea. Russia has engaged in further aggression and invasion and attacks and war against Ukraine, and we need to hold a very firm line.
Thank you so much for your thoughts, David Kramer.